Good morning, pleasure to be here. Let me begin with a case for why you should spend 20 minutes of your Friday morning with me. And I'm going to do that by flashing, if I can get the right button. So as a company that's been around for over 100 years and a research organization that's been focused on innovation for, I believe, 72 years, 1945, one of the things I think I have the opportunity to share with you is a sense of what are the things about innovation that are both hard and some of the things that you have to watch out for to get it right and be sustainable. A number of you are obviously driving significant innovation agendas at various scales, from small 3-person organizations to several 100,000 organizations. But one of the things that we have noticed being around for a long time, it's part of the DNA of our organization, is there are certain things, irrespective of market transformation, technology, and so on, that continue to remain to be true about doing sustainable innovation. And what I'd like to do in the next 20 minutes is share some of the thoughts and perspectives, driving off of 2 examples that we have experienced very recently within IBM. It's less the examples, but the meta messages that I hope I leave with all of you. But I intentionally wanted to start with this slide just to give you a flavor that the culture of innovation has been around in IBM for a long time. If you notice the top left, it had nothing to do with information technology, services, hardware, or software. It was meat chopping. But all the way from there down to hardware, to supercomputers, to databases, to AI, and now to quantum, we have had this understanding of what it takes to sometimes translate wacky ideas into something that makes sense. And that's really what I'd like to share with you today morning. But what I want to do is, rather than, and there's mountains of books, articles, thought processes on innovation. So what I'd like to do is really not start with what innovation is, how do you structure it, but really talk about what's changing in the process of doing innovation. Very much like our industry, very much like many aspects of technology, and very much like software development, I believe innovation is also undergoing a transformation. And I'm drawing the analogy between, those of you in software engineering will know the whole move from waterfall to agile and DevOps. And I believe very much the same thing is happening already in research and innovation. It's going to continue to happen. And the reason it's happening is also because timescales are shrinking. Nobody has the patience to really all the time be off in the cocoon on one side of a wall for ages and then come out and hope that what you build is relevant to the market. And number 2 is, I think the technology is moving from a support service into something that is ingrained into industry and business. And you can't do that innovation by sitting off in an ivory tower. So this picture is, if you will, the equivalent waterfall model for classical innovation. You did your basic research, you hopefully had a breakthrough, you did prototyping, and you didn't start touching the market or clients until somewhere where that yellow line. And then you did a normal evolution. And the parallel here is, before DevOps, you had a product development phase and you had an operational phase you did not have. And there was sort of a line in between where you tossed a product over for the folks who actually install, deploy, and run it. I think very much the same thing is happening with innovation. That line has to be and is becoming extremely porous. Research and innovation doesn't happen just sitting in ivory towers in a lab. It happens very much with a close interaction of the ecosystem. As a data point myself, the lab that I run here in India is about 60–70% of the lab that's out there all the time working hand in hand with clients, because many of the times the basic research you need to do really comes of what we hear from the market. And this interaction happens actually both ways. The forward direction is where you don't wait for everything to be really clear, even in innovation. We talked about agility and iteration in the field when you put a product out there, an API out there. I think if you go upstream to innovation, even when you have an early research idea, when you have a disruptive, something that you want to take to the market, the ability to go out there and prototype, put stuff out there which is half-baked, 1/3 baked, maybe 1/100th baked, is really the way the world is moving forward, because you need that feedback very, very early, even to know which direction to go. Second is, of course, co-creation with clients. It's becoming one of the most effective ways. As IT becomes no more a support service, it really becomes ingrained. Many times the problems cannot be solved just by research or an innovation arm. And I believe this is true whether you are a 5-person shop trying to innovate in a V2 of your product or a 300,000 organization trying to transform an industry. That's sort of the forward direction. But I think equally importantly, what's happening is more and more, you listen to what's happening out there to understand sometimes what are sort of fundamental breakthroughs you have to work on. And what I'm hoping to do in the next, so the time doesn't change, I still have 20 minutes, which is good, but in the next 15 minutes or so is give you 2 examples in the last couple of years where in IBM, we have experienced both the forward arrow and the backward arrow. And I hope those examples give you a sense of how to think about innovation in your respective organizations. So the first example I'm going to talk about is quantum. And the reason I pick quantum is I think it conveys to me the most disruptive approaches we have taken in probably what you could consider as most esoteric technology. So let me step back a little bit. I'm going to go back to early 2016 or late 2015. Here was a technology which we believed our physicists and scientists who work at unbelievable superconducting material and low temperature physics, we believed that we were comfortable enough to start putting out real workable quantum machines. Now, if ever there was a technology breakthrough that should have gone through the waterfall model, this was it, right? You work with a one-off client, maybe an energy department or a big university, really mature this through the process into something that makes sense in the market. This you would have imagined would be a perfect fit for a waterfall innovation model. But we as a company consciously chose to do it very, very differently. We said that, yes, you could do it that way, but really the more effective way to do it is to reimagine this, to say, why don't we put it out on the cloud? Now, the reason to do that, and that's what we did in May, there were really 3 reasons to do that. Number 1, putting a technology out there forces you to identify what are the gaps in the technology. To put up a cloud service means that I don't have the luxury of a controlled environment and 2 clients that are using my service. My underlying hardware and the physics behind it better be mature enough because the experience cannot be any different from using a Google Maps API or a Netflix API, right? So the bar on consumability becomes very high. That pushes the team. That's number 1. Number 2 is interdisciplinary. One of the biggest catalysts for innovation is to have interdisciplinary thinking. And the decision to put quantum on the cloud required or forced us to have a bunch of physicists and low temperature physics experts and quantum theorists to work hand in hand with the folks who do Ruby and AngularJS and Node.js for a living. Really bring completely diverse set of skills together and force them to communicate, to understand how you take this technology out. Because we know that for this to be successful, eventually, there have to be more than 100 quantum programmers. There have to be an ecosystem of programmers who are able to work with this technology. Why wait 5 years to learn that? Let's put it out and start to understand what that means. So that was the second reason to do it. And the third reason, and I think this is another important paradigm for innovation, innovation these days is driven by an ecosystem. So rather than having a quantum system that is we keep out in the corner for 5 people to use, putting it out there allowed us to build up an ecosystem of scientists, students, innovators who start to understand what this technology could do for them. So the 3 takeaways from this decision that I think, and by the way, within a matter of 6 months, over 350,000 experiments were run, way beyond any of our expectations on the adoption and use of a quantum cloud experience. And we believe that without that decision, we would not be where we were today, getting ready to actually release prototype systems as part of IBM Q within a matter of 1.5 years, because that experience with putting high-end technology out there, remember my line about a porous border, taking it out to market, providing that experience very, very early on was critical for us to have the confidence to be able to then say, yes, we can actually put a system out on the market. So the 3 takeaways from an innovation perspective were, be disruptive in not adopting a traditional approach to maturing the technology, and be ready to put your innovation out there, if you will, whether it's going to succeed or fail. Number 2, if you are able to catalyze a multidisciplinary team to pull something together, and you have the luxury and the opportunity to do that, absolutely do that, because they can work wonders. And I wish many of you could be in some of these rooms where the discussions happen. The discussion between somebody who is an expert in putting up scalable cloud services and somebody who is an expert in quantum computing is worth seeing. And I would sell tickets to do that discussion, but that's really where a lot of that innovation happens. And I think in every little microcosm, you have an opportunity to do that. I want to go back to Dr. Shetty's inspiring talk. I think he said, to build a real product, you have to sit there, watch a doctor in action, which means the innovation happens when you're able to put a technology is working hand in hand with a doctor or a nurse. It's the same story here. We had to put those kinds of people together. And as I said, which where today we are ready, we have now a 16 and 17 qubit mission out there, and we are ready to actually start to bring this out into the market as IBM Q. So that to me is one example of how a completely different approach was taken to innovation, and we were able to make progress. The second example I want to go back is my favorite baby these days, and I think they mentioned it, is blockchain. And I want you to stare at this picture and observe a few things. This picture, in the traditional model, would be completely the other way around, in the sense that if this was a traditional platform technology innovation, you would take science and R&D, bring it all together, put out a platform, work it with clients, reimagine it, and then build networks and ecosystems, and then make your money that way. This was an example of observing what's happening out there and recognizing that, hey, there is some opportunity here to really do fundamental innovation. So how did this story play out? This story played out in the following, when you will see the same themes in quantum, but reflected very, very differently. First theme is, there are a bunch of people in the company who were, who experiment with everything new happening out there, and they were playing with whatever was out there in respect of Bitcoin and Ethereum and other early stage cryptocurrency protocols out there. Sitting in a room with people who understood security, cryptography, and had domain expertise in these technologies. And they come together and realize, okay, this is pretty cool, but I know a much better way to do this. And I can harvest the innovation that's happening out there, but really repurpose it to the markets and the clients that I want to serve. So the story of blockchain in IBM is, in some respects, a reverse story of what normal innovation happens. You start by observing what's happening in the market, harvest the opportunity. And this was one where the innovation arm of the company played a completely different role. The innovation arm of the company, the research division, took on all the roles from evangelist to technology development, to sales, to marketing, to development, to deployment, because again, you cannot wait. An opportunity like this, you cannot wait to set up a business unit and a product line to take it to market. You got to grab it when you have to. So here was an example of recognizing that there is innovation happening in the world of cryptocurrency, but the underlying idea of trusted transactions is of tremendous value in an enterprise setting. So let's harvest that. So we went out there, harvested that idea, and started doing a number of early experiments and a first of a kinds. That basically, the innovation arm essentially was creating a new market on a product. It was not a product team to which you were adding innovation. You were essentially creating a new class of platforms and products based on what you were observing out there. And from there, we grew and recognized that for this to be successful, the platform has to be built in the open. And so that's really how a Linux Foundation project was co-created by several organizations, technology vendors, enterprises, banks, healthcare vendors, and a lot of companies. And we participated in a big way to incubate the framework for the technology so that the platform is out and in the open. So this is, again, a third principle that I think we will see more and more. Open innovation platforms becoming the way to move forward, with enterprises differentiating, but the core being absolutely the same. The traditional approach would have been to say, okay, this is a new innovative idea, let's go build a platform around it, but open innovation was the way to go. From there, we said the innovation arm is going to go hand in hand work with clients. In a matter of about 16 to 18 months, the research team essentially did on-the-ground work with clients all over the world. That is what allowed us to harvest and understand what is a platform, an enterprise-ready platform that one could put out on, and then from there, harness a scientific agenda. So in some respects, blockchain, if you will, completely reverse the innovation cycle, where we started with something out there, and now we have a research and technical development agenda that tells us what are the hard problems to solve to really make this ready for the market and for innovation. And this is what I meant by the reverse arrow, that I think today in innovation, you don't necessarily always start with a scientific breakthrough. Sometimes you start with a scientific breakthrough, but oftentimes you start with something that people are already doing that you spot an idea in. You come back, experiment, and then harvest an innovation agenda out of what's happening out there. So that's, I think, a second example that I thought illustrated what is happening in innovation in a very different way. So if I had to step back and talk about what we have learned, at least some of these things, and none of these bullets should fundamentally surprise you, but I want to pepper it with the few comments that I think we have realized. One is innovation. One of the hardest things about innovation is that there is this balance between innovation being relevant to your strategy and innovation being conflated with your strategy. And that balance is something I think every organization has to discover. If you tie it too soon, you're not going to be innovative enough. If your innovation is limited to V1.1 of a V1 that's out there, there's only so much innovation that you can do. That's business strategy and product evolution. On the other hand, innovation cannot be about let's have a bunch of wacky ideas every Friday and not really manage and foster it, because that becomes unsustainable and not effective. So I think the trickiest part in innovation is that it's not business strategy, but there is a strategy about making it effective. And that's striking the balance between how closely it must be tied to business strategy and how to give it enough freedom. And that's a balance I think every organization discovers. One approach to do it is to just sort of take a portfolio approach. Make sure that if you have an innovation portfolio, there is a sweet spot in the middle that's fairly clear and aligned with where you want to go, but that there is enough wiggle room on either side for you to be able to do wacky things because you don't know which one works. That balance is something every organization, I think, has to learn to strike. And it's never the same. It changes over a period of time, but that's, to me, the hardest problem. Second is, I think oftentimes innovation is mistaken as just have some crazy things and once in a while something works. Innovation requires fostering and management. And that means that very much like everything else in management, you have to be able to have a framework, be able to measure it, have goals, outcomes. Let me give you a couple of examples. One of the things we do at Innovation and IBM is have a process known as an accomplishment process. And what we do is evaluate innovation teams, whether it's a standalone division like the research division or innovation teams, on the success rate of their innovation funnel. And understand, and the success rate is measured very much in business terms, is very much measured in dollar impact. But if you don't have a framework and a mechanism, a process to do it, there is no way to strike that balance between business strategy and innovation. So fostering and management of innovation has been fundamental. Some of the mechanisms that we use is to have an innovation funnel that cuts across the organization, things that seed innovation, things that select innovation that matters, and things that operationally manage innovation. And we have a framework at every one of those processes. Last, and I think this is probably the most important, sustainable innovation always requires the ability to say no. And that is often the most difficult thing, because every idea often looks that it has a possibility. And I think this may be less critical for smaller organizations, but as organizations scale, the ability to say no becomes one of the hardest things to do. And the ability and the requirement to say not comes necessarily from the skills of the people, but from whether the market opportunity or the path that is required for the innovation to be successful, are we able to pull it off? For example, take blockchain or quantum. Were those approaches viable without the right mix of skills of people? No. But it is because we have the right skills of people that we are able to make it forward. My last comment is on what are the pressures against innovation. And there are really two that stand out. One is the biggest pressure against innovation is success. The biggest pressure against innovation is having an amazingly successful product, solution, or service, because there is really no incentive to really innovate because you have a baby that's doing pretty well and growing well. So I think going against the grain is something that organizations have to learn to be innovative. The second thing I said is the second biggest pressure against innovation is organizational homogeneity. And so to us, the recipes for successful innovation are the four that I've talked about. It's an honest assessment of skills and competencies so that you know when to say no amongst the ideas that are coming up in your organization. Second, I think this is been the biggest revelation for us, which is as IT becomes central to our life as opposed to support, interdisciplinary thinking is the foundation for. As I step back and think about the last 3 years of our organization, the best innovation has come when different types of people, defined either by degrees or industry expertise, came together. Third is frameworks. And the last one is, as I said, this is this balance between how closely it's tied to strategy and how much it is separate from strategy. It has to be an integral part of your portfolio, but cannot be an afterthought. So with that, I want to thank you for the opportunity and wish you all a wonderful conference. Thank you.